Welcome to Insight. Today we are chatting with Wendy Selig, President and CEO of the Melanoma Research Alliance Foundation, the largest private funder of melanoma research in the United States. Wendy joined the MRA after a decade with the American Cancer Society and currently serves on the board of directors of the National Coalition of Cancer Research. She has generously agreed to share some of her experience with us. I'd like to thank you, Wendy, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, talk about melanoma and the challenge that melanoma poses to individuals who are living with the disease, families that are navigating that emotional terrain and the physical terrain. And then we can talk a bit about the research that is there to address this condition.
Sure. Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity on behalf of MRA to share a little bit of thinking with you. Melanoma is a very deadly skin cancer. Unfortunately, it strikes thousands of people every year in the United States, about 70,000 new diagnoses in the US and about 132,000 worldwide. The thing about melanoma is it's a very deadly skin cancer, but for many people, fortunately, if you catch it early, it's something that you deal with, you have it removed, you remain vigilant thereafter, and life goes on with no further problems. So it's essentially curable for most of the people who have it. And for that reason, a lot of people don't understand it. The problem is that when it spreads, as it does for several thousands of people a year in the US, it's very difficult to treat. It's one of the most virulent of all cancers, and you think about it as something that happens usually on the skin, but it can go anywhere in your body once it starts to spread. And at that point, for 40 years, up until very recently, there was almost nothing effective that could be offered to its victims.
It was just the alleviation of pain and suffering and really
Right.
just...
So most people with metastatic melanoma, so stage 3 and stage 4 melanoma that has gone to a distant organ in their body, have less than a year after diagnosis. And the treatment options, I mean, there are people who have had success, but the numbers are very small, and the treatment options for most people have been very unsatisfactory until just recently, where the research has started to pay off finally. So this is what we're focused on.
Those old treatment options were painful. They were not particularly effective.
Correct.
They reduced quality of life significantly.
Right.
So there were no good choices.
No, there were no good choices, and as I said, because the cancer is so virulent and can spread anywhere, there's a great deal of suffering that goes on in late stages of melanoma. And so that's really where we come in, and where the research over the last decade or so, MRA has only been around, this is our 6th year, so we're still a very young foundation, but things have accelerated so greatly just in the last few years. Last year, 2 new drugs came to market for metastatic melanoma patients, and this was the first new hopeful therapy for these patients in over a decade, 12 years to be exact. Now, these treatments are showing survival advantage, which is obviously the thing you look for.
Right.
People can live longer and hopefully better quality of life as well. They are not the silver bullet. People are still dying. About 1 person an hour in the United States dies of melanoma. And so we still have more work to do, but for the first time in 40 years, there is real hope that we are seeing a pathway to solve this disease.
What was the key to the breakthrough development of these 2 drugs, the first in over a decade? And what is the key for future breakthroughs?
So the science has really, it's kind of a perfect storm in the science. I mean, the sequencing of the human genome. It's a good perfect storm, exactly. Something that patients have been waiting for a long time. So the sequencing of the human genome and the advent of personalized medicine and looking for what's known in the business as biomarkers.
Right.
So a particular target that a particular drug could work against, as opposed to the sort of mass destruction chemotherapy, which is what had been offered to patients beforehand. So this is looking for a particular mutation in your cancer that a particular drug can work on. So over the years since the sequencing of the human genome, they identified what they call a driver mutation in about half of melanoma patients. So for those patients, they have a particular genetic marker in their cancer that is driving that cancer. And then the pharmaceutical industry came to bear with a drug that was aimed at that mutation, and that drug is now on the market as of last year. So if you are a patient, if you're one of the 50% of patients who are dealing with this disease today,
with that marker,
there is a drug for you. Now, it's not a panacea. It doesn't last forever. It doesn't work for absolutely everybody, but it works for the majority of those patients. And it works in a dramatic fashion. So people who were too sick to get out of bed, their tumors were melting away and they could go on with their lives, until the next problem. So this was a really tremendous breakthrough.
And the research that goes behind that is incredible because it's very data intensive. You take a look at the conditions, you look for particular genetic attributes, you then connect those attributes to a particular condition. You then have to deepen that research to see whether indeed there is that kind of correlation among your patients. When you find it, very often it's not 100%, it's 50% or 25% or whatever. Then you start creating a drug to deal with that. Then you have to test the drug to see whether it actually has the impact that is predicted. Often it doesn't. Huge investment required. And very data intensive. In a sense, you have, as you said, the perfect storm is about computing technology, genomics technology, all of the devices that go into doing the analysis and having it happen quickly enough for it to actually have an impact. Not to mention the research to create an actual drug that addresses that marker. It's an incredible team of people.
It is. It's a huge collaborative effort, and I think it's been pointed at. So melanoma is a small disease relative to oncology in general, but melanoma is becoming a real-life sort of poster child test case for a lot of these kinds of things that are going on in general in oncology, and not just in oncology, but in other serious and life-threatening illnesses. So this whole advent of personalized medicine and how you do all the things you just described, take all those steps, which can take years and decades. What we're about is trying to accelerate that progress and trying to bring people together through collaboration in such a way as we won't waste time. There'll be a lot of sharing of information. It's not any one academic institution, it's not any one foundation, it's not any one drug company, it's not any one government agency, it's everybody coming together. And so in melanoma we've seen this tremendous success, and it's pointing the way towards where we need to go in the future. So it's proof of concept now, and so now the real issue for us is how do we capitalize upon that, and how do we leverage what's happened before to get there, all the way to get there quicker. And so that is that was the one drug, and then the other drug, which has come to market, is in a different sort of discipline, which is equally important in melanoma, and that's immune therapy. So this is the idea that is really coming to fruition now, which people have had for a long time, which is how do you get your own body's immune system, your body's defenses, to fight back against cancer? And it's been a very difficult issue because your body doesn't recognize cancer as a foreign thing going on because it's your own body's cells run amok.
But meanwhile, there are some people's bodies who are more capable of fighting
than others.
That's true.
That's true, but what the field has long held, and melanoma happens to be one of the most immune-based of all the cancers, so this is, again, an area where you might have expected to see this coming to fruition first, and that is what's happened. So the second drug that came to market is in the immune therapy space. So it's a drug that, it doesn't matter what your genetic markers are, any patient with melanoma, metastatic melanoma, could potentially benefit. Now, the numbers of patients who actually do benefit are much smaller because it's a broader population. But even still, it's significant and significantly better than anything we had seen for decades before. And this drug works by telling your immune system, you need to attack the cancer, as opposed to what the cancer does is send out signals to your body's immune system that says, hey, leave me alone, I'm part of the body. So again, this is sort of a transformative advance. And now what we're doing is figuring out, well, who are those 21, 22% of patients who actually do get a long-term response from that? What makes them different from the others? And how can we identify more patients that will respond and make these immune therapies better so that more patients will have the benefit. So that's really the two avenues that we're working on right now in the science.
One of the issues that one finds in medical sciences is that for conditions where there are very few people who suffer from those conditions, and where the research requirements in order to find treatments are high and the costs are high, that there is no commercial logic that would support the extensive investment required to develop solutions. How does your research alliance address and break that logic?
Bringing the drug to market, it requires a major investment for a pharmaceutical company or a biotech or a device, whatever element it is. And you're right that there is a business proposition there, because these are companies, they have shareholders, So what our organization tries to do is fund the research in what we would call the translational space. This is the area leading into the expensive clinical trials phase.
Right.
So the preclinical and the very early phase clinical work that's so important to kind of shine the light on, yes, this is a good bet, or no, this is not a good bet, to explain broadly that this is something that should be invested in and that has a greater chance than perhaps something else of coming to fruition.
So in a sense, you're investing in the proof of concept.
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't use the word investing. We are funding in that very important space that is often called the Valley of Death, that area where somebody's had a basic science discovery about how something might work, and then it has to be translated into, well, how is that going to work in a particular disease, say melanoma, for a particular population of people, and how are we going to actually make it real, as opposed to just a concept, maybe something that works in a cell line or something that works in a mouse. How is it going to work in a human population,
right.
a population of patients? So we're doing that. The other thing that I think is really important about what we can do, because of course we're the largest private funder, but that term largest is relative. So we fund about $8 million a year. Mm-hmm. That's a fraction of what needs to be spent to bring any drug to market, and we're funding in all areas of interest in melanoma research. So the other thing that we are trying to do is bring partners to the table. Clearly, we can serve as this catalyst function. So our funding is seed money to get over a hump and hopefully then bring other funding to bear. So if you're a brilliant scientist in an academic institution, and say you're young in the field, you're probably not likely to get an NIH grant right away. Those are hard to get. But you have a great idea, you have a great mentor, you're working in a tremendous environment. You come to us and you might get one of our young investigator grants. That will get you started in your lab, and hopefully you'll develop some interesting data for your proof of concept, which then maybe you can use. You can take it to a pharmaceutical company, you can take it to the NIH, and that can draw additional resource, which can sort of help to carry it over the goal line.
So you're also performing a vetting function.
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, we are looking for the most exciting translational science in melanoma that's out there. And we take all comers in terms of proposals. We fund around the world. Mm-hmm. We fund in 10 countries. We put out a fairly broad request for proposals. We try to identify key areas that are most important in the science in any given year. So, for example, right now, looking at resistance. Why do some people who have done well on that genetic marker drug suddenly have their cancers come back and they develop resistance to the drug? So what's behind that? We are also interested in combinations between different kinds of therapies, because we know that melanoma, maybe a little bit like HIV, is probably going to require some sort of a cocktail approach, right, because this cancer is smart and will have windows and doors that it goes through to get around, escape routes around what's being thrown at it. So these are areas that we put out there, and we say to the community, give us your best ideas. They submit their grants. We have a world-class review process with the world's leading experts in all the disciplines relevant to melanoma reviewing, peer review the research. And then we will fund the best of the best from that. So in that sense, we are performing a vetting function.
What does your funding look like?
we raised, it'll be close to about $9 million this year. We are very fortunate. MRA is a little bit unique from the very beginning. It began with founding support from a family, Deborah and Leon Black in New York City. They had a personal connection to melanoma. Deborah had stage 2, very aggressive stage 2 melanoma diagnosed on the bottom of her foot. And fortunately, this is about 5.5 years ago, so fortunately she's doing very well. She went through her treatment journey and is fortunately doing well. And then she and her husband, who had the means to really make a difference, worked with their longtime friend Mike Milken, who is no stranger to the disease space.
Pancreatic cancer and so on and so forth.
Prostate cancer. Exactly.
Prostate cancer.
And his philanthropy is sort of legendary. And he has an organization called the Milken Institute, and MRA is actually affiliated with the Milken Institute and their center called Faster Cures. So we're like a living, breathing model of that faster cures mentality. And
so Michael basically provided some advice to the Blacks?
And the infrastructure. So the three of them got together and said, what could be done, because 40 years had gone by since Mike Milken's own father had died of melanoma. And very little had changed in those 40 years, even though great progress was being made in other cancer disease states. So their discussion was what could be done to really jumpstart the field and transform what was going on. And so MRA was born out of that. And the Blacks made a very generous founder's gift up front, so that within 3 months of MRA sort of getting up and running, the first research grants went out. What had happened is this was a very hard scientific problem to solve. You pointed out that the numbers are not enormous. And as a result of it being a hard problem to solve and the numbers not being enormous, there hadn't been any funding really focused on the research problem. There were other organizations and they were each doing a little bit, but nobody was putting all their chips on research. So they created MRA. Within 3 months, the first grants went out. They funded almost, I think, $7 to $8 million. I wasn't involved then, the first year. And then every year thereafter. And the Blacks fund all of the operating expenses of the organization. They made a $40 million commitment up front. And subsequently, in the last 2.5, going on 3 years, we've raised another almost $30 million from other sources to boost what we can do. And we also look at how we can leverage dollars. So we have matching grants with industry. We have matching grants with other foundations. We look to see when our investigators that we've funded can then go on and turn that into an NIH grant. So that's been another $30 million of leveraged funding. So we have put about $100 million on the problem through these different mechanisms, and things are starting to change.
And your staff? How does your staff look?
My staff is small, but mighty. We do amazing work. We have about 6 full-time employees. We have wonderful pro bono help in a lot of different ways, whether it's PR or public affairs. We're based here in Washington. We do a little bit of outreach with the government, because the government's a very important partner in this, and we have some terrific help with that. Our chief science officer is a consultant to our organization. She actually runs the melanoma program at Johns Hopkins. She's one of the leading voices in immune therapy and is leading one of the most exciting areas of melanoma research herself. So she's a busy lady, but she provides overall scientific advice and leadership for the organization. So we work hard.
Well, and it's just such a great challenge to meet, to find ways to address these conditions. As you address these conditions, the impact will not only be personal, but will also bridge other fields of endeavor. We see this constantly, and it's just a great endeavor and a great cause that you're involved with. Thank you so much for spending some time with us, Wendy, and thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thanks.